I'm Laura Fox. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Streetlight Ventures.
What's the backstory of Streetlight Ventures? Why did you create this fund?
Yeah, I think a lot of people dream of starting a fund, and maybe they've been thinking about it for a while. I even meet college students who talk about it. For me, it happened actually pretty organically. I was an operator and running businesses, so that included running City Bike here in New York. I led diligence at Sidewalk Labs, and I built and launched startups at BCG's Digital Ventures Group. And during that time, I was mentoring and advising a lot of startups. And so you take a 70-hour-a-week day job, and then it's like you're layering on 3 hours a week is where it started, and then it got up to 10. And at the same time, my co-founder for Streetlife, Sonam Villani, was experiencing the same thing while she was working for the city of New York and in some of her past careers. And so we had known each other for about 10 years and just started getting together and comparing notes on what we were seeing from the startups that we were talking to. And we started discovering that some of the top pain points that companies were facing were some of the ones that we were best suited to help them solve. So that included things like regulatory complexity in deployments, business model and operational planning, connecting to customers and business development, and then thinking more holistically about their capital stack. Sonam's background initially was in infrastructure finance. I did a lot of asset financing in my last role, and so we really kind of thought holistically about how you build a company. And at the same time, we had a lot of VCs reach out to us. We're like, I'm looking at this wonky climate company or urban company, and I don't really understand it. I don't want to invest. It seems complicated. And so we're like, okay, we're good at doing this. These are massive markets, and other people don't like doing it. So great, this is a great opportunity for us.
And so you raised how many funds at this point?
We're on Fund 1.
Okay, and how much have you deployed so far? How many checks do you try to write every year?
Yeah. So we're a $30 million fund. We just started deploying funds last year, and so kind of first 3 investments were in Rhizome, Daisy Chain, and Harvest, and happy to talk more about all of them. Average check size right now is around 250 to 300, and that'll grow to around 500 to $1 million later this year. And so that means, for folks who know venture, that we're more of a co-lead or follow type position rather than a full lead. Typically, when startups are looking at venture firms, you want typically a larger fund to be in the lead position.
So what is your sweet spot? Who are you looking for? What type of problems are you excited about investing in? Yeah,
we invest in pre-seed and seed stage companies, all B2B, that are operating at that intersection of cities and climate. And so we define that as 5 core industries: mobility and logistics, buildings, energy, waste and water, and adaptation.
Okay. And where do you sort of scout for these opportunities then, or these entrepreneurs and startups?
Yeah, all over. We think about it in 4 different buckets, though. One of them is that both Sonam and I are really good at not only kind of participating in networks, but building networks. And so we started Climate Tech Cities, which is a big Climate Tech New York chapter. I run a mobility happy hour. Sonam runs a dinner series for women investors, right? And so we're really dedicated to kind of building net new communities for people to get together around these topics. And then we mentor and advise in a lot of different incubators and accelerators. We invest typically when a company has a beta stage product in place and has done a pilot or 2, but are looking to meet founders earlier so that we can be helpful as they're kind of thinking about building their companies. And then we're on panels just because, again, we've been in this industry for a long time. And then we have what we call a life's work network because we didn't wake up and realize that climate was a big issue and a big topic. And we're not tourist investors, so despite kind of changing macroeconomic environments in terms of federal government changes, things like that, we're not going away. And so we just have folks from across our career that are sending us companies and companies who we've mentored with and advised for a long time that send us their friends.
And what kind of companies excites you the most? Like, do you have a thesis you're pursuing, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, we have sub-theses under each of those different areas, and I could go into a lot of detail on them. But essentially for each of those areas that we're looking for, we apply a pretty standard lens to how we look at companies. And this is something that I actually encourage all startups to ask investors is how do you assess and look at a company? Ours is a 3-part framework that essentially is does it matter? Can they do it? And can it scale? And so under the does it matter is this a meaty pain point that the industry is facing? How well do you understand that customer and can talk to the use cases that cause those problems and pains? Second is what's the size of the market? And third is, of course, like the climate impact. And that first bucket we consider almost our hurdle, right, to moving forward in the process. So If a company at a minimum doesn't meet those, then they're probably not a great fit and we won't have a live conversation, but refer them on to other investors. Second bucket is, can they do it, right? What's the unique experience of the team in solving that kind of problem? How good are they at selling the business? Like all those kinds of attributes. And then the last bucket, can it scale? You know, I've done a lot of product builds in the past and kind of adapted and stitched together different things in the past. And one of them is this framework used by IDEO in the past, using feasibility, desirability, and viability. And that's something that we've kind of adapted for our purposes. So under feasibility, we're really looking for companies that have that beta stage product. Another great thing for founders to ask is, like, when does a company invest? Some, venture funds have a lot of PhDs on staff and they like to invest in early science. We have kind of operator, kind of regulator experience, so we really like to help accelerate. So we're looking at a beta stage product. And then we're also within that bucket looking at different regulations. And then desirability stuff like ethnographic research, right, that a company has done, user testing, and then kind of commercial pipeline. And then the last area is around viability. So what's the business plan? How are they thinking about pricing? And then what would you have to believe on the unit economic side, especially if it has a hardware component?
And what excites you at the moment the most? Like, are there any trends or specific areas you're pursuing or looking for solutions around, or?
Yeah, totally. So we're one of the few investors who has adaptation as part of our thesis. So that's kind of long been part of what we're doing. I think it's very top of mind for people right now with what just happened in Los Angeles, the hurricane that affected the Southeast, right, where we're talking about LA is maybe $30 billion of homeowner damages. The Southeast is $80 billion in homeowner damages. And when you look at things like World Economic Forum estimates, there's about $4 trillion in corporate assets at risk in the next 4 to 5 years. And so that's something that we look at quite a lot. Adaptation used to be hard, gray infrastructure that cities installed, i.e. seawalls. They're totally not investable, right, by an investor. But as, unfortunately, the effects of climate continue to increase, more and more businesses, communities, and places are affected. So it's certainly a big one for us. Within the, building meets energy side of the house, because we were focused on an urban thesis, we're by nature focused on things like multifamily residential, dense commercial, and all of those others. So we have a few investments in that space, and that overlay with energy is obviously a huge need because 80% of the energy in cities is dirty, right? And how do you think about distributed energy resources while decarbonizing buildings in a way that makes sense for developers is something that we're very keen on. And things that have been developing like virtual power plants and things like that, a lot of that has been done in single family homes, but that's something that we're looking at is how does it work for multifamily and what's a good solution there. And then on the mobility side, as you can guess from my background, this is an area I'm totally obsessed about. But right now we're probably most interested on the delivery side of that and looking at what are software tools and other use cases that can help kind of drive efficiencies. I have a lot of experience building operational technology tool stacks essentially to do a lot of that work, and so find things that can help built world problems be more efficient, get to customers faster, solve those core pain points is really compelling.
So if there's a startup out there listening to this or watching this that ticks some of those boxes, how do they get in touch with you? How do you, I appreciate you sit on panels, you are out networking and mentoring, so you have a lot of touch points, but if someone hasn't had a chance to meet you yet, how would you recommend they get in touch with you and pitch?
It's actually really easy. So we have a pitch form on our website. Sam and I both have it on our LinkedIn pages. We very much, as the core kind of value as a fund, value transparency in an industry that is rather opaque, as many founders are probably familiar with. And so it has a very simple set of questions, probably takes about 5 minutes to fill out. And we actually respond to everyone that submits through that form. And if they're not a fit for us, we'll send a response saying hey, you're not a fit, but here's a couple investors that could be, here's a couple resources that you could take a look at, because we ultimately want to respect founders' time and be supportive of people building great solutions out in the world, even if it's not narrowly a fit for our thesis on cities, beta stage product available, right? All of those kinds of things.
So you must have seen a lot of pitches over the years then. So maybe you can share to the entrepreneurs listening, what's the good, bad, and ugly? What are the green and red flags, I guess, that you've seen and like or don't like?
Yeah. This is a controversial statement. I hate pitches. I think founders hate pitches, right? Because you're seeing the same thing for the 1,000th time. And so one of the things that we do when we get that form is we don't just like take a cursory look and say like yes, no. We'll actually send questions in advance of a call so we can dig in from the beginning with the founder. And so I would just like say that from the beginning. You know, it's fun to go to pitch days and things like that. We don't even like hosting those kinds of events ourselves. We actually host a quarterly demo night to get more into kind of the actual build side of the product. But things that really impress me, and then on the flip side are upsetting, maybe just as one thing to call out, is, you know, we are pretty obsessive about what is the core customer pain point. And so a founder that can talk about that really effectively, give use cases and examples of how that affects businesses, and then talk about how that pulls into their product is immediately something that we're much more interested in. Versus if that isn't brought up and then we're trying to kind of back into how does this really work? What are you solving for? Is that enough? I think that that's one where you can make a huge difference in your pitch.
Okay, so you've been in this space for some time now, so you've seen how trends come and go. And some people would argue that perhaps ESG and sustainability, especially under the new leadership in the White House, is sort of perhaps going away a little bit in terms of trendiness. What would you say to that? Do you agree or do you disagree? And then what's your take on that?
Yeah, totally. We don't define ourselves as an ESG fund, but I do have reflections on that. We define ourselves as a kind of returns and impact fund that focuses on climate as the core lens of that. And we focus on startups that are solving these core business challenges, which we think are resilient no matter the kind of macroeconomic environment. And I think something else core to our thesis is because we invest in cities and places, we're looking at kind of local approaches. We're not investing in companies that require a lot of federal incentives or funding to make the business model work. And so I'd say that's different. But I think that we are by nature not doom and gloom people, we're optimists. And I think that there are still lots of things to be optimistic about despite what's happening at a federal level. For example, under the last Trump administration, renewables under operation doubled, right? Not because someone was funding it, but because they were just better and cheaper. Second was over 100 cities committed to net zero commitments, and some of those were pledges, some of them are policies, some of them are defined regulations, like in New York and Boston and a number of other cities. And so during this period, we expect people who are at a pledge stage to progress to policy or progress to regulation, right, and really be driving that for themselves, and you're starting to see some of that. We just generally think that this could also maybe controversially be a hardware renaissance moment over the next couple of years, because some of the funding that can't be pulled back is a lot of the greenhouse gas reduction funds that are in the bank accounts of the people who are dispersing that. And so for a lot of the kind of mid-stage hardware companies out there, Series A, Series B, there's a lot of dollars on the table, about $30 billion to accelerate that in really novel and interesting ways. And so, yeah, I think that this is still a moment, despite the antagonism that exists, to believe that strong businesses that solve real pain points make a difference.
Well, that's a great note and very optimistic note to finish things on. So, Laura, thank you again for taking the time. Appreciate your point of view here.
Thanks for having me, Chris.